What happens when a daytime television host pushes a guest too far, crossing every line of decency until the entire studio erupts into chaos? In just 46 seconds, one inflammatory comment would trigger a meltdown so explosive that it would force a dramatic exit, leaving cameras rolling and an audience sitting in stunned silence. The Loose Women's studio was buzzing with its usual energy. The panel was assembled, ready to tackle the day's hot topics. Denise Welch sat at the table, flanked by her fellow panelists, Nadia Sawalha and Kay Adams. But today's show would be anything but usual. Today, Piers Morgan was in the building, and from the moment he walked onto that set, you could feel the temperature rise. Denise had always been known for speaking her mind, for standing up for what she believed in, especially when it came to mental health awareness and supporting those who needed a voice. She was warm, genuine, and real. Piers, on the other hand, had built his career on controversy, on saying the unsayable, on poking and prodding until something exploded. And today, he seemed particularly determined to light a fuse. The show opened with light banter, the kind of casual conversation that fills the first few minutes of any talk show. But even then, there was an edge. Piers sat across from the panel with that familiar smirk, the one that suggested he knew exactly what he was about to do and was relishing every second of it. "So Piers," Denise began, trying to keep things civil, "you have some thoughts on the topics we are discussing today." "Oh, I always have thoughts, Denise," Piers replied, leaning back in his chair with exaggerated confidence. "The question is whether anyone here is actually ready to hear them." Nadia jumped in, attempting to steer the conversation. "Well, that is what we are here for, isn't it? To have different perspectives." "Different perspectives," Piers repeated, almost mockingly. "Is that what we are calling it now? I thought this show was about real talk, not tiptoeing around feelings." There it was, the first jab. Denise felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. Years in this industry had taught her to pick her battles, to not react to every provocation. But Piers was just getting started. The conversation shifted to mental health, a topic incredibly close to Denise's heart. She had been open about her own struggles, using her platform to help others feel less alone. When she began speaking about the importance of compassion and understanding, Piers interrupted her. "Oh, here we go," he said, rolling his eyes dramatically. "The mental health card. Does everything have to be about mental health these days? Whatever happened to personal responsibility?" The studio went quiet. Even the crew members behind the cameras exchanged uncomfortable glances. Denise sat forward, her voice measured but firm. "Piers, mental health is not a card people play. It is a real, serious issue that affects millions of people. Perhaps if you showed a bit more empathy, you would understand that." "Empathy," Piers scoffed. "Empathy does not mean coddling people and making excuses for every little thing. Some of us believe in toughening up and getting on with it." Kay Adams tried to intervene. "I think what Denise is saying is that there is a balance between accountability and understanding. We can acknowledge that people are struggling without dismissing their experiences." But Piers was not interested in balance. He was interested in domination, in winning, in being the loudest voice in the room. He turned his attention fully to Denise, his tone becoming more aggressive. "You know what your problem is, Denise. You want everyone to feel sorry for themselves. You have made an entire career out of victimhood." The words hung in the air like poison. Denise's face flushed, not with embarrassment, but with rising anger. She had dealt with criticism before, had faced countless battles in the public eye. But this was different. This was personal. This was an attack on everything she stood for. "How dare you?" she said quietly, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "How dare you sit there and belittle the struggles of people who are suffering? You know nothing about what it takes to live with mental illness, to fight every single day just to get out of bed. Piers waved his hand dismissively. Oh, please, spare me the melodrama. Everyone has bad days. Not everyone turns it into a career. Nadia could not stay silent any longer. Piers, that is completely out of line. Denise has helped countless people by sharing her story. What have you done besides tear people down? I tell the truth, Piers shot back. Something that seems to be in short supply on this panel. You all sit here pretending to be champions of the people. But really, you are just pushing an agenda. The mental health industry is making millions off people's misery, and you are all complicit in it. The accusation was outrageous, so far beyond acceptable that even the producers in the control room were scrambling. Denise stood up from her seat, her hands gripping the edge of the table. You are absolutely unbelievable, she said, her voice rising. The mental health industry? You mean the doctors, the therapists, the support workers who dedicate their lives to helping people? You are not telling the truth, Piers. You are being cruel for the sake of being cruel, and I will not sit here and let you spread this poison. Piers stood up as well, matching her intensity. If you cannot handle a robust debate, maybe you should not be on a talk show. This is what happens when you live in an echo chamber. Someone challenges you, and you fall apart. This is not a debate, Denise fired back. This is you grandstanding and attacking vulnerable people. There is a difference between having an opinion and being deliberately harmful. Kay tried once more to restore order. Let us all just take a breath here. We can disagree without it becoming this heated. But it was too late for diplomacy. The damage was done. Piers, sensing he was losing the room, decided to go nuclear. He looked directly at Denise with a cruel smile and delivered the line that would seal his fate. Maybe if you spent less time crying on television and more time living in the real world, you would realize that most people do not have time for this self-indulgent nonsense. But I suppose, when you have made a living out of being troubled, you need to keep the performance going. The studio erupted, not with applause, but with gasps and murmurs of disbelief. Nadia stood up, pointing at Piers with fury in her eyes. Get out, she said firmly. You do not get to speak to her like that. You do not get to mock people's pain for entertainment. Piers laughed, actually laughed, as if the whole thing was amusing to him. Oh, so now I am being thrown off the show? How very predictable. Cannot handle the truth, so you silence the messenger. You are not a messenger, Denise said, her voice steady now, filled with righteous anger. You are a bully, and I am done giving bullies a platform. The other panelists were standing now too. Kay had moved closer to Denise, a hand on her shoulder in solidarity. The audience, which had been silent throughout the confrontation, began to clap, slowly at first, then building into sustained applause. They were not clapping for Piers. They were clapping for Denise, for her courage, for her refusal to back down. Piers looked around the studio, realizing that he had miscalculated badly. This was not playing out the way he had expected. He had pushed too hard, gone too far, and now the entire room had turned against him. But even in defeat, he could not resist one final shot. This is exactly what is wrong with television now, he declared, his voice dripping with disdain. You cannot say anything real without being shut down by the thought police. Well, I will not apologize for having standards. Standards, Denise repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. You call this standards? You have spent the last 20 minutes attacking me, attacking people who are struggling, attacking anyone who dares to show compassion. That is not standards, Piers. That is just cruelty dressed up as honesty. A producer appeared from off camera, approaching Piers with a tight expression. The message was clear, even without words. It was time for him to go. Piers straightened his jacket with exaggerated dignity, as if he was the wronged party in all of this. Fine, he said, his voice cold. I will leave you all to your safe space. But do not pretend this is journalism. This is therapy masquerading as television. He turned to walk off the set, but Denise was not done. Her voice rang out across the studio, clear and unwavering. You know what? Piers, you are right about one thing. This show is about real talk. And the real talk is that what you just did was disgraceful. You came here with the sole intention of causing pain, of belittling people who have been through hell. And you did it with a smile on your face, because you think controversy makes you important. But it does not. It just makes you cruel. Piers stopped in his tracks. For a moment, it looked like he might turn around, might say something else. But perhaps even he recognized that there was nothing left to say. He had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He continued walking, disappearing into the wings of the studio as the cameras kept rolling. The panel sat back down, the energy in the room still crackling with intensity. Denise took a deep breath, composing herself. Her hands were shaking slightly, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Nadia reached over and squeezed her hand. "You were incredible," Nadia said softly. "Absolutely incredible." Kay nodded in agreement. That took real courage, standing up to him like that. He has been getting away with that behavior for far too long. Denise smiled weakly, exhausted from the confrontation. I just could not sit there and let him say those things. Not about mental health. Not about people who are genuinely suffering. Someone had to say something. The audience was still clapping, many of them on their feet now. It was not just support for Denise. It was a collective rejection of everything Piers had represented in those heated minutes. His arrogance, his cruelty, his complete lack of empathy. The show tried to continue, to move on to other topics, but the energy had shifted entirely. What was supposed to be a routine episode had become something else, something raw and real. The kind of television moment that people would talk about, not because it was planned or scripted, but because it was genuine. Because it mattered. Backstage, word was already spreading. Crew members who had witnessed the confrontation were calling friends, sending messages. Piers had left the building without speaking to anyone, his exit as dramatic as his presence had been. But while he had stormed off hoping to make a point, all he had really done was prove Denise right. Back on set, Denise was finally finding her equilibrium again. The shaking had stopped. Her breathing had steadied, but the fire in her eyes remained. She had been tested, pushed to her absolute limit, and she had not broken. She had stood her ground and defended not just herself, but everyone who had ever been made to feel small by someone like Piers Morgan. I want to say something, Denise said to the camera, her voice calm but firm. To anyone watching who has ever struggled with mental health, who has ever been told to just get over it or toughen up, I see you. Your pain is valid. Your struggles are real. And you deserve compassion, not judgment. The words were simple, but powerful. In that moment, Denise had transformed what could have been a career low into something meaningful. She had taken Piers's cruelty and weaponized it against him, using it as a platform to spread exactly the kind of message he had tried to silence. Nadia added her voice to the moment. And to be clear, what we just witnessed is not acceptable. Not on this show, not on any show. We can have different opinions. We can disagree. But we cannot attack people for being vulnerable. That is where the line is, and Piers crossed it. Kay nodded emphatically. Absolutely. There is a difference between strong opinions and personal attacks. What just happened was the latter, and it has no place here. The solidarity among the panelists was palpable. They had closed ranks around Denise, had shown that they would not tolerate that kind of behavior, no matter who it came from. It was a statement, not just to Piers, but to anyone who thought they could use a platform to demean others. As the show moved toward its conclusion, there was a sense of something having shifted. The Loose Women panel had faced down a bully, and won. Not through shouting or matching his aggression, but through dignity. Through standing firm in their values. through refusing to let cruelty go unchallenged. Denise felt drained, but also strangely energized. She had been through battles before, had faced criticism and attacks, but this felt different. This felt like a turning point. Not just for her, but for the conversation around mental health, around how we treat each other, around what we accept as entertainment. In the control room, the producers were already dealing with the fallout. Phone lines were lighting up. Social media was exploding. But the overwhelming response was one of support, not for Piers, but for Denise. People were thanking her for saying what needed to be said, for not backing down, for showing that kindness and strength were not mutually exclusive. The final minutes of the show passed in a blur. The panelists wrapped up their discussion, thanked the audience, and signed off. But everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something significant. Not planned, not rehearsed, but completely authentic. As the cameras stopped rolling, Denise sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly. The other panelists gathered around her, offering words of support and encouragement. The audience members who could reach her came up to shake her hand, to thank her personally. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. "I cannot believe that just happened," Denise said, shaking her head. "I came in today thinking it would be a normal show." "Normal went out the window the moment Piers walked in," Nadia said with a wry smile. "But you handled it perfectly. You did not let him intimidate you." "He tried, though," Kay added. "He tried everything. But you stood your ground." Denise smiled, feeling the support of her colleagues and the audience wash over her. She had not wanted this confrontation, had not gone looking for a fight. But when it came, when she was pushed to that edge, she had not flinched. She had spoken her truth, defended her values, and in doing so, had shown what real strength looked like. The walk back to her dressing room felt longer than usual. Crew members stopped her along the way, offering their support. Makeup artists, camera operators, production assistants, all of them had witnessed what happened, and all of them wanted her to know she had done the right thing. In the quiet of her dressing room, Denise finally allowed herself to process everything. The confrontation, the anger, the fear that maybe she had gone too far, and then the relief when she realized the entire room had been on her side. It was a lot to take in. Her phone was buzzing nonstop with messages of support. Friends, family, colleagues, even people she had not spoken to in years were reaching out. The consensus was unanimous. She had handled an impossible situation with grace and strength. She had stood up to a bully and won. But for Denise, it was not about winning. It was about drawing a line, about saying that some things were more important than ratings or controversy, that mental health mattered, that people's pain should not be entertainment, that cruelty dressed up as honesty was still just cruelty. As she gathered her things to leave, Denise thought about all the people who would see this episode, who would hear her words. She hoped they would feel seen, feel validated, feel less alone, because that was what mattered. Not the drama, not the headlines, but the impact. The real, tangible difference it might make in someone's life. The drive home gave her time to decompress. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving her tired, but satisfied. She had been tested today in ways she had not expected, but she had passed the test. She had stayed true to herself, to her values, to her mission of helping others. When she walked through her front door, the weight of the day finally lifted. She had done what needed to be done. She had spoken truth to power, had refused to be silenced, had shown that standing up for what is right is always worth it, even when it is hard. The television world would talk about this moment for a long time. Some would analyze every word, every gesture. Others would debate whether she had been too harsh, whether Piers had been treated fairly. But Denise knew the truth. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply refused to let cruelty masquerade as courage. In that studio, on that day, when pushed to her limit, Denise Welch had shown what real integrity looked like. Not in shouting the loudest or being the most controversial, but in standing firm in her convictions, in defending those who could not defend themselves, in refusing to let a bully win. And Piers Morgan, who had walked onto that set thinking he would dominate the conversation, had instead been exposed for exactly what he was. Not a truth teller, not a champion of free speech, but simply a man who had mistaken cruelty for cleverness and paid the price. The lesson was clear. You can have strong opinions without being cruel. You can challenge ideas without attacking people. You can be provocative without being harmful. And when someone crosses that line, when they choose cruelty over decency, they should be called out every single time. That is what happened in 46 seconds when one comment went too far. When Denise Welch had enough and decided that some lines should never be crossed. When a bully learned that not everyone will sit quietly while he spreads his poison. When television, just for a moment, became about something more than entertainment. It became about values, about dignity, about standing up for what is right.